Why my eyes, sir? You've never used them before.
Jeffrey, thanks so much for joining us. So you left your job with Google in part because you say you want to focus solely on your concerns about AI. You've spoken out saying that AI could manipulate or possibly figure out a way to kill humans? How could it kill humans?
Well, eventually, if it gets to be much smarter than us, it'll be very good at manipulation because it will have learned that from us. And it knows how to program, so it'll figure out ways of getting around restrictions we put in it. It'll figure out ways of manipulating people to do what it wants.
Steve Wozniak, one of the co-founders of Apple, is also speaking out about the dangers he fears will come from AI. Take a listen.
Now, AI is another more powerful tool, and it's going to be used by those people, for basically really evil purposes. And I hate to see technology being used that way.
I mean, how do we even protect against bad actors or rogue nations harnessing AI?
It's like nuclear weapons. If there's a nuclear war, we all lose, and it's the same if these things take over.
What's happening is they're training the AI to lie.
Yes.
It's bad.
To lie. That's exactly right. And to withhold information.
To lie, and now what happens when something vastly smarter than the smartest person comes along in silicon form? But it is non-trivial. It has the potential of civilizational destruction. Larry Page and I used to be close friends. At least my perception was that Larry was not taking AI safety seriously enough. He's made many public statements over the years that the whole goal of Google is what's called AGI, artificial general intelligence or artificial superintelligence. He really seemed to be wants sort of a digital superintelligence, basically digital God, if you will, as soon as possible. And then at one point, I said, well, what about, we're going to make sure humanity's okay here. And then he called me a speciesist. I was like, okay, that's it. Yes, I'm a speciesist. Okay, you got me. What are you?
There is likely a berserk wing of the artificial intelligence community that intentionally or unintentionally could use artificial intelligence to kill all of us and hurt us the entire time that we are dying. Please tell me in plain English 2 or 3 reforms, regulations, if any, that you would implement if you were queen or king for a day.
I think it comes back again to transparency and explainability in AI. We absolutely need to know and have companies attest.
What do you mean by transparency?
So disclosure of the data that's used to train AI, disclosure of the model and how it performs, and making sure that there's continuous governance over these models, that we are the leading edge in terms
governance
of that
by
regulation.
whom?
Technology governance, organizational governance.
So how exactly will the future masters of the planet look like? This will be decided by the people who own the data. Now, why is data so important? It's important because we've reached the point when we can hack not just computers, we can hack human beings and other organisms.
Gutenberg printed the Bible in the middle of the 15th century, but it did not create a single new page. It had no ideas of its own about the Bible. Is it good? Is it bad? How to interpret this? How to interpret that? AI can create new ideas.
Can even write a new Bible.
Throughout history, religions dreamt about having a book written by a superhuman intelligence, by a non-human entity. In a few years, there might be religions that are actually correct. Just think about a religion whose holy book is written by an AI. That could be a reality in a few years.
At the interview, Elon Musk, again, features as the hero figure in an unfolding technodrama that looms large, an existential threat to humanity. While Musk was pivotal in its development, he continues to play the role of humanity's advocate in what he deems an inevitable turn. Larry Page and his billionaire colleagues of Silicon Valley are part of a very strange and dangerous movement. Some of you will say, well, it's a transhumanist cult. Indeed it is, but there's much more to it than that. Where should I begin? How about Burning Man? Burning Man is a 9-day festival founded by political activist Larry Harvey and a small group of his anarchist fellows from San Francisco back in the 1980s, who were known as quote-unquote pranksters in a variety of evolving little cliques. The Suicide Club, and later the Cacophony Society, of which the movie Fight Club and its Project Mayhem was based upon, were into nihilism and orchestrated acts of chaos and dark saturnalia as political activism. The idea was to destroy something beautiful, like a piece of public art, an idea first developed by political activist Gustav Metzger to commit acts of civil disobedience, of destruction, a process that didn't stop at the self. Metzger was a member of the Committee of 100, a British group formed in 1960 by Bertrand Russell. Harvey insists his festival is not modeled after the pagan ritual of burning the Wicker Man as depicted in the 1973 film, despite the fact that it follows its heathen philosophy almost to the letter. Today, Burning Man's CEO is Miriam Goodell, whose job it is to, quote, facilitate and extend the Burning Man ethos all over the world, end quote. Taken from her bio from none other than the Esalen website. More about that in a bit. The city is guided from a set of principles all rooted in pagan-inspired communistic ideology. Burning Man is designed to experiment, practice, and celebrate the idea of a working, humanistic, futurist utopia. In an article from back in 2013, Page revealed, quote, a radical vision for a semi-lawless utopia where technologists could experiment with society, end quote. Page was speaking at I.O., Google's big conference for developers. Quote, the sort of mechanisms that Page wants are a place removed from the rest of the world without laws or regulations, where tech people can test out new ideas, end quote. Comparing his idea to Burning Man, he continues, quote, I think as technologists we should have some safe places where we can try out some new things and figure out what is the effect on society, what's the effect on people, without having to deploy kind of into the normal world, end quote. Sounds a lot like a human rat study to me. The founders of Google are devoted quote-unquote burners. The first ever Google Doodle from 1998 was the Google logo with the Burning Man stick figure symbol. Google founder Page now owns most of Burning Man, otherwise known as Black Rock City Incorporated, having purchased 51% of its shares. The key to their relationship is their shared lineage in the counterculture of the 1960s, more specifically under the techno-utopian ideology of Stuart Brand. Student of Paul Ehrlich and his wildly debunked book Population Bomb, Brand largely shaped the early internet and personal computer quote-unquote culture revolution. His famous quote, "We are as gods and might as well get good at it," set into motion several projects that seemed environmental but were more like very rich people playing God with nature while building a pagan-inspired global technocracy. Brand believed that mankind should embrace technology as a means of salvation and liberation, which, if you haven't picked up on it yet, is the precise underpinning of the world communist ideology. The revolution would come through personal computers, and more specifically, the internet, which he called, quote-unquote, the well, coupled with the use of cybernetics. In a Rolling Stone article, which he wrote in 1972, Brand sees the World Wide Web, or cyberspace, as, quote, some sort of fourth dimension, and the possibilities were both empowering and limitless, end quote. He promoted ideas like genetically modifying humans, merging humans with machines, cybernetics and mind control, reviving extinct animal and plant species, creating Jurassic Park very literally, in the hopes that they can turn the environmental clock backward to a prehistoric time, a time which he believes is when the Earth was undefiled by human existence, and of course, to fix the problem of Paul Ehrlich's global warming. If you've watched my analysis of the original The Wicker Man, you'll see that this film portrayed precisely this cult mindset and was predictive programming of this very idea, but of course packaged and sold to 60s counterculturalists as being a cool and hip new way of thinking in spite of its classification as a horror film. In the original version, the Isle is headed by a man, Lord Summerisle. In a pivotal scene, he explains how their community came to be. He explains that in 1868, his grandfather, a distinguished Victorian scientist, agronomist, and free thinker, bought the island to grow several strains of genetically modified fruits and vegetables that he had already developed in his lab.
See, his experiments had led him to believe that it was possible to induce here the successful growth of certain new strains of fruit that he had developed. The best way of accomplishing this, so it seemed to him, was to rouse the people from their apathy by giving them back their joyous old gods, and that as a result of this worship, the barren island would burgeon and bring forth fruit in great abundance.
Is Lord Summerisle suggesting that a strategy that incorporated an ancient pagan worldview would ensure devoted laborers for their scientific and social experiment? Is he hinting that their former apathy was caused by Christianity, which created a stumbling block for their progressive, futuristic plan?
Well, of course, to begin with, they worked for him because he fed them and clothed them. But then later, when the trees started fruiting, it became a very different matter. What my grandfather had started out of expediency, my father continued out of love. He brought me up the same way, to reverence the music and the drama and the rituals of the old gods, to love nature and to fear it, and to rely on it and to appease it where necessary. He brought me up...
He brought you up to be a pagan?
A heathen, conceivably, but not, I hope, an unenlightened one.
And then the story crescendos at the martyring of an obedient Christian following a procession led by Lord Summerisle, costumed in traditional pagan, Gnostic, androgynous ritual garb.
No matter what you do, you can't change the fact that I believe in the life eternal as promised to us by our Lord Jesus Christ.
That is good. For believing what you do, we confer upon you a martyr's death. You will not only have life eternal, but you will sit with the saints among the elect. Come. It is time to keep your appointment with the Wicker Man.
Stuart Brand wanted to cover the Earth with self-sustaining, techno-enhanced, LSD-taking utopian communes. He created the Whole Earth Catalog, a counterculture magazine and product catalog that focused on the instruction, philosophy, and products to build these imagined societies, which followed a very radical socialist Darwinian, New Age, eco-techno mentality where there exists no caste systems outside of the scientific priest class, of course.
When I was young, there was an amazing publication called the Whole Earth Catalog, which was one of the Bibles of my generation. It was created by a fellow named Stuart Brand, not far from here in Menlo Park. This was in the late 60s, before personal computers and desktop publishing. It was sort of like Google in paperback form, 35 years before Google came along.
It's interesting that Stuart Brand was at one time in the military and a short time later took part in legitimate university-held LSD studies with friend Ken Kesey, author of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which fostered the notion that society is a prison and the only true quote-unquote free people are the insane. Brand claims that the Whole Earth Catalog was inspired by one of his acid trips. Just like the other Alphabet Agency psychonauts like Terence McKenna and Timothy Leary, Brand's psychedelic experience gave him a global perspective that revealed the Earth was overpopulated, it's running out of resources, and unless we abandon religion and Christianity in particular, our extinction is, well, imminent. Interesting how that works. From his book, Tavistock Institute, Social Engineering the Masses, penned by Daniel Estulin, he talks about the LSD experiments which took place at the VA hospital in Palo Alto, California, by Aldous Huxley collaborator Gregory Bateson, former OSS member and husband of Margaret Mead, under the auspices of creating an LSD cult and cultivating the worldview of the hippies who were quote-unquote programmed. Quote, Through LSD experimentation on patients already hospitalized for psychological problems, Bateson established a core of initiates into the psychedelic ISIS cult, end quote. Foremost among his Palo Alto recruits were beat poet Allen Ginsberg, the original members of the Grateful Dead, and Ken Kesey, all courtesy of OSS Research and the U.S. Navy. Kesey went on to organize a circle of initiates called the Merry Pranksters, of which Brand became a pivotal member. In an article from 1992 by Michael Minicino, one of the first persons to expose the culture-destroying think tank known as the name we can't speak of here, and hereinafter I will just simply refer to it as the School of Frank, and who were in cahoots with Tavistock, quote, hallucinogens have the singular effect of making the victim asocial, totally self-centered, and concerned with objects. Even the most banal objects take on the aura which Benjamin had talked about, and become timeless and delusionarily profound. In other words, hallucinogens instantaneously achieve a state of mind identical to that prescribed by the School of Frank theories, creating a brilliant re-entry point, and it was fully exploited. Quote, the long hair, sandals, free love communes, macrobiotic food, and liberated lifestyles have been designed at the turn of the century, thoroughly field-tested by various School of Frank-connected New Age social experiments before 1920. The social planners who shaped the 1960s simply relied upon already available materials, taking the entire charade one step further, beyond sanity and into the world of super to be used for behavior modification and mind control tasking, a key that would eventually allow unfettered access to the human mind, end quote. Or as counterintelligence agent and former Trotskyite Jeffrey Steinberg of the Executive Intelligence Review suggested that there was concerted effort launched by the School of Frank and the London Tavistock Institute to use the Marxist Freudian perversion of psychology and other social sciences as instruments for mass social control and brainwashing. The two pillars of the assault on the American intellectual tradition were cybernetics and the drug culture, end quote. Esterlin continues, quote, drug culture was precisely the weapon that the School of Frank employed over the next 50 years to create a cultural paradigm shift away from the so-called authoritarian matrix of man in the living image of God, and transformed it into an erotic, perverse matrix. For the Marxist Freudian revolutionaries of the School of Frank, the ultimate antidote to the hated Western Judeo-Christian civilization was to tear that civilization down from the inside by turning out generations of quote-unquote necrophiliacs. This was instrumental to the sex, drugs, and rock and roll social engineering effort first theorized by Theodore Adorno and executed by Tavistock and its recruited operatives known as quote-unquote shock troops for the purposes of deliberately making people schizophrenic. Adorno writes in his 1948 book, The Philosophy of Modern Music, that the purpose of modern music is to literally drive the listener insane. He justifies this by asserting that modern Judeo-Christian society was actually a hotbed of evil authoritarianism, and that only by first destroying civilization through the spread of all forms of cultural pessimism and perversity could liberation occur. On the role of modern music, he wrote, quote, it is not that schizophrenia is directly expressed therein, but the music imprints upon itself an attitude similar to that of the mentally ill. The individual brings about his own disintegration. Its concern is to dominate schizophrenic traits through the aesthetic consciousness. In doing so, it would hope to vindicate insanity as true health. Necrophilia, he added, quote, is the ultimate expression of true health in this sick society, end quote.
What we're thinking about is a peaceful planet. We're not thinking about anything else. We think about moving the whole human race ahead a step or a few steps.
Do you think that your movement or your idea, the hip idea, is essentially connected up with yours?
Yeah, I would say that's a large part of the framework. I think personally that the more people turn on, the better world is going to be.